When I look back at my childhood, I see so many little pieces of life scattered around. Memories of summer afternoons on the porch, of the way my mom hummed while she cooked, and of my dad sitting quietly with a cup of coffee as though he carried the whole world in his hands. But there's one piece that stands apart from all the others. It's the kind of memory that changes a person forever, the kind of story you never expect to live through, and the kind of truth that stays locked inside because speaking it aloud feels impossible. This is the story of my dad and me, and the secret I can never tell anyone. I was 15 when my world started to change. At that age, life feels heavy in a way you can't explain, and the smallest things feel enormous. My mom and dad had always been the center of my universe. My mom was the steady one, organized, always on top of everything, making sure my homework was done, dinner was warm, and the laundry folded. My dad was the quieter force. He worked long hours and often came home looking exhausted, but when he smiled at me, it felt like the sun broke through the clouds. The summer before my sophomore year of high school, I started noticing that something wasn't right. My parents would argue in whispers, their voices hushed but tense. My mom's eyes would turn red in the evenings, and my dad's shoulders seemed to carry more weight than before. I pretended not to notice, but inside, I was terrified. One night, I came downstairs for a glass of water and found my dad sitting at the kitchen table alone. He had his head in his hands, the kind of posture that made my stomach twist. I hesitated, then walked closer. "Dad," I whispered. He looked up, startled, and I saw tears in his eyes. My strong, quiet dad, crying. He quickly wiped his face, but the moment was burned into my heart. "Hey, kiddo," he said, forcing a smile. "Couldn't sleep?" I shook my head, too afraid to push. I got my water and stood there, watching him. Something told me this was one of those moments where silence said more than words. Finally, he reached out and patted the chair next to him. I sat down, and for the first time in my life, I felt like I wasn't just his daughter. I was his confidant. What he told me that night is the secret I still carry. He didn't give me all the details, but enough to understand. My dad had made a mistake. He had been unfaithful to my mom, and the guilt was eating him alive. I didn't know what to do with that information. I was 15, a child, and suddenly I was holding a secret too heavy for my shoulders. "Promise me you won't tell your mother," he whispered. His voice cracked, and his eyes were begging. "I'll fix this. I'll make it right. But I can't. If she knew, it would destroy everything." I nodded, though my chest felt like it was caving in. That was the night everything changed. I loved my dad more than anything, but I also loved my mom. Now, I was caught in the middle of a truth I couldn't share with either of them. The weeks that followed were unbearable. My mom kept asking me if I was okay, because I had grown quieter. My friends noticed too, but I just smiled and pretended everything was fine. At night, I'd lie in bed and replay that moment in the kitchen, wondering if I had misunderstood, wishing I could go back to not knowing. My dad, for his part, seemed different too. He tried harder. He took me on drives, bought ice cream out of the blue, asked about my day more often. It felt like he was trying to convince himself he could still be the dad I needed, even as he carried his own guilt. One afternoon, we went fishing at the lake near our house. We didn't talk much, just sat there with the soft ripple of the water around us. Out of nowhere, he said, "Sometimes people make mistakes that they regret every single day, but the hardest part isn't living with the mistake, it's living with the silence." I wanted to cry. I wanted to tell him I didn't want to carry this silence. But instead I nodded and stared at the water, pretending to be focused on the fishing line. As the years passed, I kept that secret locked inside. My parents eventually worked through whatever storm they were weathering. My mom never seemed to know, or if she did, she never let on. Life slowly returned to something that looked normal, but for me, nothing was the same. Carrying that secret shaped me in ways I didn't understand until I was older. I became more guarded, more careful with trust. I learned that people, even the ones you love the most, are imperfect and fragile. I learned that sometimes doing what someone asks of you feels like betraying someone else you love. The older I got, the more I realized that my dad's mistake wasn't the whole story of who he was. He was still the man who taught me to ride my bike, who sat through my school plays even when he had work the next morning, who hugged me tighter than anyone else could. But he was also human. Now, years later, I still think about that night in the kitchen. I still hear his voice asking me to keep his secret. I did, and I always will. It's not because I think what he did was right. It's because, in that moment, I saw the brokenness in him, and I loved him too much to let it shatter us completely.
This is the story of my dad and me.
A story I can't tell anyone in my real life. A story that has shaped who I am, quietly and deeply. It's the secret that made me realize how complicated love can be, how heavy silence can feel, and how sometimes the hardest truths are the ones that never leave your lips. And so I carry it, always.